We will now hear from Gary Boatright. He works in Church History Department, and where he manages the Church Historic Markers Program. He has a BA in History and Geography from Weber State, and a Master's degree in Museum Studies from the University of Oklahoma. He'll be talking about marking the international landscape.
Good morning. Throughout time, the Lord has directed his people to remember the great things that he has done in their lives. And the scriptures are filled with several examples of this. The psalmist declared, "Remember the works of the Lord." Paul encouraged the New Testament saints to watch and remember. And Moroni counsels each reader of the Book of Mormon to remember how merciful the Lord hath been unto the children of men. And the Savior in modern times admonished the saints to remember the new covenant. Well, Elder Marley K. Jensen, former church historian and recorder, explained the significance of remembering. He said, "The scriptures, especially the Book of Mormon, make it clear that remembering is a fundamental and saving principle of the gospel." He further explained that remembering the past gives us needed perspective as God's children to have faith in our future destiny and thus to live more faithfully in the present. Anciently, the Lord provided a way to help his people remember his hand in their lives. Following 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the ancient Israelites found themselves separated from the promised land only by the Jordan River. As directed by Joshua, the Israelites selected 12 men, one from each of the 12 tribes, to carry the Ark of the Covenant across the river. Joshua promised that as soon as the soles of the men carrying the ark touched the water, the river would be cut off, thus allowing the priest and all of Israel to walk across on dry ground. As promised, the waters parted, and the Israelites entered the promised land unencumbered. Following their crossing, the Lord commanded that 12 stones be gathered in place, where the feet of the priest, which bear the Ark of the Covenant, stood. This was done, the scriptures record, that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then ye shall answer them, that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And these stones shall be as a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. This simple stone monument stood as a physical reminder for the Israelites of the miracle performed by God that day. Well, like the 12 stones marking this event, several markers and monuments memorialize the events, locations, and people associated with the restoration of the gospel and its spread throughout the world. The first documented effort by the church as an organization to commemorate its history with the marker occurred in 1886. The church purchased an acre of property and erected a monument at the site of the temporary settlement of Mount Pisgah, Iowa. Since its placement more than 125 years ago, this monument has stood as a memorial honoring the faith, dedication, and lives of the pioneers who lived and died there. And this also marked the beginning of several projects by the church in the decades that followed to celebrate their history through erecting monuments. Despite its tremendous growth internationally, the church as an organization has done little to commemorate its history in the areas outside of the United States and Canada through historical markers or monuments. Local members and former missionaries have largely taken the lead in commemorating the places and events that they see as significant in their area of the world. Well, rather than just placing a marker, saints in Great Britain plant trees to create living memorials to church history. According to Peter Fagg, a British saint and church history enthusiast, planting trees is a common occurrence throughout the British Isles. Located on the grounds of the London Temple is the David O. McKay Oak. And according to tradition, during a visit to the site, President McKay asked construction crews to save a large oak tree, believed to be 350 years old. Unknown to President McKay, workers on the temple and members of the church in England felt the tree represented the life of President McKay, and they named it in honor of it. Workers then fabricated and placed a small plaque on the tree, which reads, "The David O. McKay Oak, living beauty and inspiration, great strength and stability, reaching toward heaven, responsive to God's sunlight, casting friendly and comforting shade, gentle in its contribution to mankind, unmoved by disturbing hands, and to be remembered." The original oak tree, ironically, has since died, but someone saved the plaque and placed it on another tree at the site, which is now known as the David O. McKay Oak. Well, located in Preston, England, is Avenham Park, which is the site of the first baptisms in England. Here, two other trees memorialize church history, the missionary oak and one that I call the convert tree. The missionary oak honors the thousands of Latter-day Saint missionaries who served in the British Isles since 1837. And next to the tree is a stone monument which reads in part, "Between 1837 and 1887, over 20,000 Mormon missionaries labored in the British Isles in the service of their fellow beings." The second tree, a small plaque placed in 1999, honors the hundreds of thousands from the United Kingdom and Ireland who have joined the church since 1847. On August 21st, 1925, Elder James E. Talmadge and others from the European Mission visited the birthplace of Carl G. Mazer, an early German convert and founder of Brigham Young University. The homeowners allowed the group to tour the home, and Elder Talmadge noted that we arranged with the owner to have an inscription plate on the outside of the house. The next year, Talmadge returned to the home for the unveiling and dedication of the plaque honoring Mazer at the site of his birth. Talmadge, also a former student of Mazer's, drafted the English version of the text for the plaque, which has survived World War II and the rise and fall of the Iron Curtain. The English translation says, "In this house on January 16, 1828, was born Carl Gottfried Mazer. Next to God, he loved his fellow men, and to the betterment devoted his life. To know him was to be well taught. He was an eminent educator, a profound theologian, and an exemplar of true religion. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to which he devoted the full powers of his splendid manhood, he was one of the Lord's leaders. He died in honor on February 16, 1901, at Salt Lake City, Utah, United States of America." Well, located not far from the Mazer home is another site memorialized with a marker. Following World War II, the East German saints suffered as the division of Germany separated them from the freedoms they enjoyed by their colleagues in the West. Despite many restrictions enforced by the communist regime, the light of the gospel remained a beacon of hope for the saints in East Germany. As documented in his book, Faith Rewarded, then Elder Thomas S. Monson traveled periodically to East Germany, ministering to the saints behind the Iron Curtain. On Sunday, April 27, 1975, Elder Monson, accompanied by the Dresden Mission Presidency, traveled to a predetermined location to dedicate the German Democratic Republic for the preaching of the gospel. In the prayer, President Monson stated, "May today mark the dawning of a new beginning of the work in this land." And as he spoke these words, Elder Monson recalled, "We heard the unmistakable sound of a rooster crowing, followed by the pealing of a cathedral bell in the distance. The day had started overcast, but during the prayer, the sun shone brightly upon us. Today, a small marker, which was placed in 1999, is a humble reminder of this simple yet significant event that took place at this site, marking the beginning of events which led to the dedication of the Freiburg, Germany temple in 1985. In November 1851, after a 2-month voyage, Carly P. Pratt and his wife Phoebe arrived in the South American country of Chile. This was the first foray into South America by the church, and it didn't go as Pratt had hoped. Due to political tensions between the U.S. and Chile, and Pratt's inability to master Spanish, and the lack of success in proselyting efforts, Pratt spent only 5 months in South America before returning to the United States. During this brief time, his wife gave birth to a son named Amr. He lived only 38 days, and on January 7, 1852, they buried their son in the Protestant cemetery in Valparaiso, Chile. Well, Chilean Latter-day Saints researched and located the gravesite of Amr Pratt in the Cementerio de Disidentes in Valparaiso. In August 1990, church leaders unveiled a small marble plaque honoring Amr Pratt and commemorating his father's mission to Chile. Roughly translated from Spanish, it reads, "Here lies the remains of Amr Pratt, son of Parley P. Pratt, apostle of Jesus Christ, and the first missionary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to South America, who dedicated that land to the preaching of the gospel." Speaking of the importance of this site to the people of Chile, Elder Emilio Narvaez, a regional representative at the time, stated, "This little grave left on a lonely hill in Valparaiso in 1852 has been as a dormant seed planted by an apostle of the Lord to bear fruit in the flowering of the gospel a century later in Chile." Well, in 1844, Addison Pratt arrived on the small island of Tubuai, marking the beginnings of missionary work in the South Pacific. For 3 years, he and his fellow missionaries labored establishing the church in the Tahitian Islands. Following his return to the American West, he received a second call to labor in the South Pacific, returning to the islands in 1850 with his wife Louisa, and served there until 1852 when government leaders pushed them out. Well, in 2008, as part of a tour of the South Pacific, Church History Department executives were shown on the island of Tubuai a unique monument memorializing the service of Addison Pratt. And unaware of this site previously, the monument piqued the interest of the visitors. Built by local members of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1931, the monument is located on the site of the original Mahu Chapel. The design of the monument, according to Stephen L. Olson, is similar to the symbols in many ancient colors that represent the sacred cosmos, laid out four-square and oriented to the cardinal directions, with small stones at each corner and a large vertical stone in the center, thus reflecting the culture of the natives who built it. The monument also bears a small metal plaque, which translated from Tahitian reads, "This is the commemorative stone to Addison Pratt, also called Paraita, our missionary who arrived here in Tubuai in 1844. Well, these are just a few examples of what has been done around the world to commemorate the history of the church. Some, like the Amr Pratt marker and that of the Carl G. Mazer home, provide deeper understanding into who or what is being commemorated. Others, like the David O. McKay and missionary oaks in Great Britain, fail to convey the significance of what is being memorialized. The small plaque accompanying the convert tree in Avenham Park in Great Britain successfully articulates in a small space what conversion meant to the British Latter-day Saints. Unlike its neighbor in the park, the missionary oak says more about those who planted the tree and placed the monument than it does about the topic it commemorates. Of the 60 words in the text, 37 are devoted to those responsible for placing the monument. The Latter-day Saints in Eastern Germany revere the Carl G. Mazer home and the 1975 dedication site as sacred places. Youth groups from the surrounding areas regularly visit these sites, where leaders teach them how the person they honor as the founder of the church in Germany became an esteemed educator in the United States. And the dedication site is used to educate the youth of the church who never lived under the shroud of communism how their parents and grandparents looked forward to the day that the Lord would bless them with all the blessings of the church, even the temple, despite living under the rule of communism. Well, with the passage of time, the marker in Chile honoring Amir Pratt weathered significantly, losing its original luster when it had been placed in 1990. Additionally, the text also contained an inaccuracy regarding the dedication of South America. As a result, church leaders placed a new marker at the site in March 2012, and today the cemetery is a location where Chilean Latter-day Saints remember the beginnings of the church in their area and in all of South America. Well, the Addison Pratt Memorial in Tubuai commemorates a heritage shared by both the LDS and the Community of Christ. Though built by the RLDS Church, Latter-day Saint leaders, missionaries, and other members visit the memorial. And today, well, Tubuai has only 17 square miles of land. It's a really, really small island, but it has 3 monuments memorializing Addison Pratt. The first one that was built in 1931, then the second one, which was built by a group of former Latter-day Saint missionaries in 1996, and then the Community of Christ placed a third monument in 1994. Well, in each area of the world, a church history advisor working under the direction of the area presidency coordinates the work of collecting, preserving, and sharing church history. The Church History Department provides guidance and training materials, including a website and a series of booklets to those called to this position. And the Church History Guide, Historic Places, provides specific direction regarding the placement of historical markers. The publication of the Church History Guide, Historic Places, and the idea that historic sites around the world can receive official recognition from the church generated a flurry of inquiries and formal requests for markers. As staff review these requests, 2 issues begin to manifest themselves. First, is historic defined by importance, time, or a combination of both? And second, does a marker have to be placed directly at the location to suitably memorialize a historic event or place? Since 1830, the church has spread around the world and has a long and respected presence in many countries. In these areas, the many first buildings, baptismal sites, dedication sites, these are all considered historic places, and many are interpreted with a historical marker. Yet in other areas of the world, the church is relatively young, having only received official recognition in more recent decades. Well, what about placing markers in these areas? Though a relatively new concept, can small temples dedicated by President Hinckley be considered historic temples? Are the sites where church leaders dedicated countries in the early 1990s historic sites? And are the first meeting houses constructed in these areas appropriate places for a historical marker? These are the questions that, there is no question that each of these sites are important, but are they historic? Many of the requests received by the church headquarters propose placing markers at meeting houses or on other church property instead of the actual site. It is assumed that by doing this, that the marker would gain more visibility, particularly among members of the church. And while true, this does come with a price, placing a marker at a location other than the actual site significantly diminishes the impact of the intended message. Even if the marker is a simple plaque with little interpretive text, the power that comes from being at the place is impossible to replicate. And while the message and story of the site can be told elsewhere, nothing can replicate the power and feeling that comes from being at the actual site. And it's my experience that if you take the time to visit a site, to wander the actual site, to ponder about it, think about it, there truly is power in being there. And if you've been to the Sacred Grove, if you've been to Gettysburg, if you've been to the dedication site in East Germany, you know that there is power that comes from being at the place. While guidelines established by the U.S. National Park Service provide some assistance in determining if a building or a site should be considered historic, these principles, used in evaluating nominations to the National Register, are widely accepted as the standard for evaluating marker proposals by many state historical organizations. And bear with me, this quote is kind of really dry, but it was written by government officials. According to the guidelines, to be classified as a historic site, a site must be associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history, or that are associated with the lives of significant persons in our past, or that embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values, or that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction, or that have yielded or may be likely to yield information important in history and prehistory. That's probably one of the boringest things I've ever read during this whole research process. But obviously these guidelines, they don't provide a clear definition of what is historic. Furthermore, historic significance is a quality that we assign based on the theoretical framework within which we happen to be thinking. And this can vary between individuals and change throughout time. So simply stated, what is viewed as extremely significant part of church history in a given corner of the world may not be viewed with the same level of importance by church history staff, and vice versa. Well, to follow the Mormon Trail today, one must travel well beyond the former bookends of Sharon, Vermont, and Salt Lake City. Wherever the church is located, its history can be found on the landscape. And the Historic Markers Program of the church, the Historic Markers Program allows the church at minimal cost to share its history and perpetuates the memory of historic events, people, and places in the minds of the rising generations. This also empowers International Latter Saints by not only helping them to remember their history, but encourages them to make history. Thank you.